uncomfortable or anything, feel free to PM any of us, because we do want to make this a safer space for all of you here today. But yeah.
I did want to say, before we get into our wonderful discussion today, there were a lot of emotions in the chat. Some people were saying they felt inspired, others said they were feeling motivated. There were some people saying overwhelmed, and we completely understand. This is a safe space, but this is a safe space. So thank you all for joining us here tonight. And, like fill the room how you feel fit. Like if you don't want to turn on your screen, that's totally okay. Totally understand. If you need to take a moment to step away and breathe for a bit, that's also okay. This week again has been overwhelming and understandably. So we're all students here. We're all here to support one another. But thank you for joining anyway in the midst of the chaos.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you all for joining. It is overwhelming. There's so many emotions in the air this past week. I mean, this entire year. Where were we a year? It's where were we like a year and more than a year ago? And seeing the dichotomy of both is very, very. It can get overwhelming, and also the lack of a spring break and a lack of a break. It really does get to you. So again, thank you all for coming, and then do whatever you feel safest doing and most comfortable doing. We do want to make this a supportive environment for all. But I guess it is 6:36, so we will officially get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming for this event under APAHM, the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So what we will be discussing is Islamophobia today. It is a collaboration between the Pi Delta Psi Fraternity Incorporated and the Asian Pacific American Coalition. Who am I? Hello, everyone. My name is Zainab Jamal. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the advocacy coordinator of the Asian Pacific American Coalition. And I'm very excited to host this workshop, co-host this workshop, and have two beautiful, amazing, intelligent professors with us today, and as we discuss this very prevalent issue and topic.
Hey guys, I am Parth Patel. I am from Title Sci Fraternity Incorporated at UCF. We are the first and only Asian interest fraternity at UCF. Our 4 pillars are academic achievement, cultural awareness, righteousness, and friendship/loyalty.
So we are the Asian Pacific American Coalition. As you can see, we have, I included our calendar of events for this month, and I also included a QR code for a petition that we have currently released. So considering the recent events that have occurred, unfortunately, it really gave awareness and rise to the importance of raising Asian American voices. So what the purpose of this petition is to establish an agency under different multicultural identities and really provide an easier space for them. And so it is under the Stop Asian Hate campaign at UCF. And it's something that we are currently organizing, and we will continue to organize. And I believe someone else can provide more details, but we are also having other APAM events. They are still happening. So today is another part of one of our APAM events. On the 29th, we will be having the glass ceiling, which is a workshop. The time listed is 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. It will be also, a professor will also be there as a guest speaker. It will be Dr. Christian Ravella. And so what the glass ceiling will be about, it will be a workshop about the model minority myth versus the perpetual foreigner effect. And it's definitely something that we do need to unpack. And on the first will be the Yuri Kochiyama documentary screening through Zoom. Yuri Kochiyama was a very prevalent activist in the Asian community, and her presence should be known and heard about by many. On the 5th, there is another advocacy workshop. It'll be our last advocacy workshop for the semester, and that will just be about whiteout history and how, as a whole, our history is kind of whitewashed, and how we're not really, we're kind of brushed over, and we're kind of in the margins when it comes to the atrocities that we have faced as a population and as a whole. And then on the 6th of April will be our Hidden Lotus Awards, where we recognize student leaders and organizations that have risen above and beyond in the pandemic. And yeah, so before I continue, does anyone want to add anything about the Stop Asian Hate campaign, or leave out anything that I said. Okay. Ready.
Right, so here are the community guidelines for today. Step up, step back, be respectful, lean in discomfort, and impact over intent. And just a content warning, there will be violence, hate crimes, and xenophobia mentioned throughout the presentation today.
So just some icebreakers. So the way, considering the attendance that we have, the way that this will be handled, if you want to speak up and introduce who you are, you can raise your hand through the Zoom function. If not, you can just introduce yourself in the group chat and just say your name, your pronouns, your major, and your year, and why are you interested in this topic? Why did you come here today? And in 3 words, what do you expect from our speakers today? What do you expect from our discussion today? What do you expect to learn, etc. But yeah, I mean, if anyone would like to speak, that would be encouraged to, and just use the raise hand feature.
Adrian?
Hi everyone, my name is Adrian. I go by the she, her pronouns. I'm a 3rd year at UCF and I'm currently an international global studies major with a minor in human communications. I'm interested in this topic just because whenever we discuss Asian American activism, so much of it belongs to East Asian issues mostly, and I think it's so important for us to understand the way that, like things like the model minority myth often erases the South Asian groups and really just erases that from the narrative of what Asia America is. So for me, coming as a Korean American, I want to learn more how to be an ally and how to encourage others to use their platforms for this as well. For all those who are new to these workshops, that's great. Like thanks for joining us here today. There's just such a need for people who have that desire or curiosity, and so we are so excited to have you all. But yeah, just please don't be afraid to be in this space here today. We're making this as much of a safe space as it is a place to empower each other through education. So yeah, thank you.
Would anyone else like to introduce themselves? Hello, Andrea. So you expect to learn more about the roots of Islamophobia in our country and how it can help towards making spaces more inclusive. Definitely. Okay. I guess we can have like
Hi there. My name is Dheeraj Lalwani. I am currently my pronouns are he, him, his. I am currently the president of the Indian Student Association. I am very interested in this workshop because I am currently a religious and cultural studies minor for the purpose of not only being a very culturally aware physician in the future, but also to be a humanitarian to underserved populations. And I expect to learn a lot more about how I can serve in different areas of the world and how it can properly communicate with cultural and religious differences.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dheeraj. Yes, we love Dheeraj. He's very involved in his community and everything. But y'all, we need to break this ice.
Okay, I'll go. Hi y'all, I'm Zora. My pronouns are she, they. I'm the editor-in-chief for Sparks right now. I'm a 3rd year English lit major. And the reason why I'm interested in this topic is because I'm Muslim and I've experienced a lot of Islamophobia during my life. And I wanted to talk and unpack that. And also we, like in our Asian community, like in the APAC community, we don't really like have a lot of spaces to talk about Islamophobia. So it's really important that we do have this discussion space to not only educate ourselves, but also like bring attention to it, so that we can figure out what to do in the future. And I guess 3 words, what do I expect? Solidarity and education, honestly. That's kind of what I'm expecting, which I know y'all are going to be doing anyway. So thank you guys for hosting this.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Yeah. Hello, Janice, and hello, Andrea, again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Hello, Angela. Definitely, just being well educated and knowing how deep rooted the problem is usually critical. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Oh, hello, Manny.
Hello. Hello, my name is Manny. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a junior majoring in aerospace. And I'm interested in this topic because being an Asian individual myself, I would like to educate myself on this topic and be a better ally.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. But yeah, I guess we'll get started. If anyone else wants to introduce themselves, feel free to do it in the chat box as we continue. So presenting our first guest speaker of the event today, we have Dr. Cyrus Ali Zargar. Again, thank you so much for coming. And so they are a scholar of Islamic studies and the endowed Al-Ghazali Distinguished Professor in Islamic Studies at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, Florida, and his research mainly focuses on Islamic philosophy, Arabic and Persian literature of medieval Sufism, classical Sufism, and ethics in both literature and film. So very, very cool, very, very beautiful portfolio. And I will hand the podium to you. Again, thank you so much for coming. And yeah.
Well, thank you. And thanks for inviting me today. The turnout's amazing. What a great group of people. You know, everybody sort of looking to understand each other. And this is really wonderful. I'm going to share my screen because I just have a few slides to show you. So when I was thinking about Islamophobia, I was trying to think about, well, you know, there's so many different angles. There's so many different ways to talk about it. And I thought of certain topics that have come up in my own classes that resonated with students, things they didn't know. And there's a book I'd like to recommend to you. It's a book by a friend of mine named Sophie. Her name is Sophia Rose Arjana, and the book's called Muslims in the Western Imagination. And so the ideas that I'm presenting here today come, well, the first few slides come from that book. There's some really amazing observations she makes about the way a certain group of people can become monsters. And by the way, monsters isn't meant only metaphorically. I mean, she actually studies some of the monster myths like, you know, Dracula and things like that, and shows some of the background connections to Muslims and narratives about Muslims in history. So it's a really great book. But the first slide here, this comes from her book. This is one of the things she discusses. This is a painting called The Death of Jane McCrae. And there was an incident where a woman named Jane McCrae was killed by a Native American who was allied with the British. And her murder became this rallying cry. Part of it depended on a sense of, you know, a sense of separation from the British and things like that, but also on thinking about Native Americans as you see in this depicted in this picture, as, well, for lack of a better word, monsters. I mean, if you look at the way they're depicted here, there's a kind of danger that's present, and it's a danger to whom? It's a danger to really the occupiers of America at that time. And there's a strange irony that I want to point out in that a group of people who, as the years would pass, I mean, Jane McCrae was killed in the late 1700s. I mean, as the years would pass, you know, there wouldn't be any problem with the people who were, you know, the settlers had no problem expanding and things like that. It was actually Native Americans who would be facing genocidal tactics, right? But the irony is the way that this picture reverses all that, right? It makes those who are downtrodden, those who are in danger, those who are oppressed into the oppressor, into someone dangerous, into someone who's risky. The other dynamic in it that that comes up in Dr. Arjana's book and is common is the male-female dynamic. It's particularly the men of those marginalized groups that are seen as dangerous. They're dangerous to, let's say, quote unquote, our women, but they're very often depicted as being dangerous to their own women. And so it becomes a means of justifying sometimes certain colonialist projects, like, okay, well, let's say women in such and such a country are at risk. They're at risk because of the men that are so dangerous. To save them, right, to be their saviors, we will take such and such an action. And very often it's military action or some sort of expansionist action. So here's an example, since we're talking about Islamophobia, from a sort of painting that's called Orientalist paintings. This was at the turn of the century, of the 20th century, this was a very popular type of art, Orientalist art. And these were, is this inappropriate, by the way? I should have maybe warned people, sorry. But anyways, actually Orientalist artwork is making a comeback in the art world. Very often it's British painters, sometimes German, but very often British and American painters painting the quote unquote Orient, being North Africa and the Middle East very often. Now, if you look at the themes of this painting, what's the irony here? I think this one might be called The White Slave, but he has another painting called The White Slave. The irony is that you have a woman who's obviously, very white, and she's being oppressed, enslaved by these dangerous, menacing, darker complected men, right? And that's very often the theme in these Orientalist paintings. There's a sense that this other who is, dangerous, hypermasculine, very often, backwards, warlike, sometimes misogynistic, presents some sort of threat. Now, this is going on when? I mean, if this is going on at the turn of the 20th century, think about what the British Empire is doing at that time. If you think about the way that it's spreading and controlling so many different parts of the world, the irony of this painting doesn't escape you, right? And you begin to realize that Islamophobia isn't about what one person thinks about someone else. Islamophobia on a larger social scale is a way to protect and justify conquest. It's a way to protect and justify conquest and subjugation, or it has been, right? So how much time do I have? How much time have I spoken for? Hold on, 32. I'll only take a few more minutes. I think I had 10 minutes top, and I think I've spoken for like 8. So I'll do all my next few slides in just a few minutes to keep it short. So this is some history into depictions and thinking about the other. But if you look at it within the context of what's been going on recently in America, it made me think about the quote unquote Victory Mosque, or what's called the Ground Zero Mosque debate that happened in New York. This was quite a little while ago. I think it was the summer of 2010, 2011. Basically, there was a Islamic Cultural Center that was going to be constructed, and it wasn't at the site of Ground Zero. It was two blocks away. It wasn't even really a mosque. It was an Islamic center. It would have I think a massage parlor, and it was supposed to have this interfaith place where people could get together and celebrate culture and all that. But it ended up becoming in the media a sort of a symbol of Islamic expansion, right? And people called it the Victory Mosque, or the Ground Zero Mosque, the Victory Mosque, because supposedly they said this was Muslims building a kind of a memorial to the destruction of the Twin Towers on 9/11. but that's not at all what it was. The interesting part of it for me, or the sad part for me, is if America stands for anything, if Americans believe in anything, it's been freedom of religion, right? And yet, as you can see here, 68% of Americans were against allowing this Islamic center to be built. It became a big deal. The mayor of New York had to say something about it. The president of the time, Barack Obama, had to say something about it. And it was very rare for even the most liberal politicians to come out and support. It was that much of a hot button issue. And as you can see here, these are protests against the building of this structure. They had to change the name. Building a mosque at ground zero is like building a mosque. This is a protest, but it is in fact a symbol and an indicator of what's going on a much bigger scale. So actually, the construction of mosques has been held up in numerous places throughout the United States, and mosques that have been built are being attacked. Now, again, what's behind this? What's behind this is a perception that these people present to us some danger, right? These people present to us some risk. These are people who threaten our way of life. It's very much the sentiment remains similar to the sentiment that I started out with, but it results in real dangerous actions and approaches to Muslims, dealing with Muslims. So here you can see here, these are states that have had one or two anti-mosque incidents. Let me go. There's a better slide here. Hold on. This I can't. Can you see the year? If it's is it on top? Yeah, I should have put the year, but basically the hate incidents against mosques and Islamic centers, these are the ones that are reported. And as you can see, it's all the way across the United States that this has been happening. Anti-Sharia legislation, also common all throughout the United States. You can see here, even in our own Florida. Anti-Sharia legislation, this is the same thing. The idea is that somehow Muslims will pass laws using their own values to kind of undo the Constitution. It's built on stories, myths, the construction of monsters, the idea that Muslims present some sort of danger that others don't. It has resulted in real lawmaking in all of the places you see here. So these are the sources that I cite, and because I wanted to keep it short, I'll stop there, but maybe it's something we can explore in the question and answer, or as we discuss this further. But in conclusion, I'll just say, the way that we imagine others, the way that we depict others, not just in art, the visual arts, whether it be in poetry, music, movies, books, it might not seem important at the time, but all of these things there's a snowball effect where it becomes the way a group of people can perceive a smaller, often marginalized group of people. The results of it are quite dangerous. In the case of Native Americans, we're talking real genocide. And in the case of the United States of America, we're talking real laws and actions against Muslims practicing their own religion freely. So it's something to bear in mind. Thank you very much. And I'm done.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zargar. So next we have our Professor Dr. Rochisha Narayan. She's a historian of early modern and modern South Asia. She's interested in exploring histories of family, communities, social protests, colonialism, and capital through the lenses of gender, sexuality, and law. She's completing her book titled Agents of Capital, Widows, Family, Community, and Law in Early Colonial India. It examines the relationships of property during the 18th and early 19th century to show that transfers of capital and political concerns involving household, community, and state. So now I'll give the floor to her.
I believe you're on mute, Dr. Narayan.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Parth, and to all of you for putting this wonderful event together, and to address some of these pressing issues, right? But also, as Adrian said, to learn how to become an ally and to express solidarity. And so, when you invited me, I thought, I had to, as all as all good students usually do, they make you think, and they perplex you, like, as to and they make you reflect upon yourself as well. And so, I was thinking, okay, what do I talk about? And actually, I didn't really have to go to search for too long, because I realized, I looked back at the courses that I'm teaching this semester, and I realized that so many of these the things that came to my mind that are relevant to what we're discussing over here were issues that were brought to my classes by our students, one of whom is a part of the audience. Angela is just a fantastic student whose ideas I learn from. I have the privilege of learning from each week. And so, I thought I'd approach this as a historian, but also as a historian of South Asia, right? And I basically have three different, or you could say, three broad arguments to around which this conversation is organized. And and some of this picks up from Professor Zargar's wonderful presentation and conversation just now. And and I'm so glad that actually he went before me, because it allows me to look at what I'm talking about from a different lens altogether. So thank you so much, Professor Zargar. The first, basically, key argument that I want to think about, that I thought about while reflecting on this, this question of engaging with the problem of Islamophobia and how it continues to affect the lives of people around the world, is, to first unpack this question of, this practice of othering. Right? Islamophobia rests upon the practice of othering that simultaneously divests Muslim communities of their rich, distinct, and context-specific histories to produce a universal caricature of Islam and Muslims around the world, right? And so, as a historian, I think restoring historicity through learning, and this can take place in many places, in many spaces, not just in the classrooms. Clearly, what you all have organized is an example, but also just outside universities, right? I think restoring historicity through learning is serves as an antidote to stereotypes that constitute the core of Islamophobia. It allows us to restore complexity to Islam, its various vernacular histories across the world, which are embodied in the distinct practices and experiences of Muslims. The 14th century the 14th century scholar Ibn Battuta, mentioned this in his travelogue. He remarked on the astonishing diversity of the Islamic world as he traveled from North Africa into Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world. And he said, "Oh, this is Islam. This too is Islam," right? And he was just constantly astounded by the difference, right, within Islamic histories itself, Islamic practices. And so what restoring historicity does is that it teaches us that any kind of lazy attempts to stereotype must be challenged by demanding rigor and learning each time conclusions are made about Muslims, and so the next core idea that which is connected, and I think this is connected to Professor Zargar, what Professor Zargar outlined for us just a little while ago, is how we can actually contest Islamophobia by actually unpacking, right, processes of othering. How do processes of othering work. And historically, there's been, starting with the work of Edward Said, there's been a lot of work, there's been a lot of analysis on, the role representations have played, as we've just seen in the talk before, right? Representations in creating the other, the monstrous other, as a way to, divest the one whose peoples who are being represented of their humanity, right? But also, and then to forward different agendas that are aligned, or that are really the purpose of such representations. And so we must ask, what are these practices of othering, and what agendas do they serve? So, and I'll just give you an example, right? For instance, in early 20th century India, anxieties about population numbers fostered the creation of the Muslim other. When the colonial state began allowing for limited representation in municipal bodies and provincial legislative councils, this is in the early 20th century, it introduced the principle of separate electorates based on the idea that only Muslims could represent the interests of Muslims, and that Hindus would vote for members of their religion to represent them. This was quite a novel thing to have happened, right? Your entire identity is being distilled only to your religion. So what follows? Seats in these representative bodies were to be based upon basically population numbers. The idea was that if we're going to be divesting some, representation to colonized subjects, and this had started happening because of a growing nationalist movement, starting with the resistance to the partition of Bengal in 1905. If they were, because the British were facing these challenges, they decided that one of the ways in which they were going to counter those challenges was to allow for some kind of representation, right? Some piecemeal gestures. But those representations, they argued, were going to be based upon religion, in the sense that based on your communities, you would get seats in these different bodies. And how would you do that? The number of seats that you would get would really be subject to your population, how many you are. Now you can only imagine what this would have done in regions to the east and west of India, where actually India partitioned in 1947. These were regions that had a larger proportion of Muslims. And so there was a lot of anxiety that now, because we are outnumbered by Muslims, we're basically not going to have enough representation, not going to have enough power. And so pamphlets started being circulated, pamphlets that stated, Hindus were a dying race, pamphlets that created, villainized Muslims as the others, people who were, now these neighbors and people others had known, were charged with this accusation that they were strategically trying to outnumber Hindus, right? So that they can gain more seats. And so so these kinds of pamphlets started circulating, right? And these discourses have not gone away. They continue to vitiate the Indian social milieu even today. Ideas about, Islamophobic ideas about Muslims trying to, in contemporary India, trying to take control by, increasing their numbers, right? But in the colonial context, how did this work? Politicized Hindu communities expressed an anxiety over assuming control by maintaining Hindu numbers. And this anxiety was expressed Firstly, by distilling people's identities entirely to their religious affiliation. That's all you are. You are your religious affiliation, right? That itself does. You can think about what a violence, right, on people and their lived realities. And second, by calling into question any practices of piety that underlined a shared ethos that went beyond Hindu-Muslim polarities. And so here, I just want to share this particular, where is it? Let's see, image with you. Okay, the one I want to share is the first one for now. Take a look at this particular image, right? This is from 1930. This was the historian Charu Gupta, and I have her book here. This is one of the it's a fantastic text. It's titled "Sexuality, Obscenity, Community, Women, Muslims, and the Hindu Public in Colonial India." So it's by Charu Gupta. So I've basically, I'm using an image that she deconstructs in this particular text. This was, the images such as these started circulating in the Hindi public sphere in the 1930s, when Indian politics was quite polarized between two leading political parties, the Congress and the Indian Muslim League. And so one of the ways in which, this process of othering took place, is taking place in this particular image, is that it basically attacked. What was it doing? It questioned Indo-Islamic practices of piety toward Sufi shrines. Basically, what was it doing? It's attacking those sites of worship that were shared by people of different religious affinities. Here in this shrine, in this particular image, you see a Sufi shrine. You also have a Sufi pir who is depicted sitting there. And what you, to the right, are several Hindu women who have come to offer their prayers. And this is something that takes place even today, where people frequently flock to Sufi shrines because of the idea, the belief that Sufis, long after their death as well, have the barakat, the charisma, the ability to perform miracles, to heal, etc. And so, Sufi shrines have played an important role in binding people across different religious groups in South Asia. Now, in this image, you see the Sufi. The idea is that is to create an anxiety amongst the Hindu readership about what happens at these shrines. What will happen if you let your Hindu women go and pray at these shrines? You will have and as Charu Gupta shows in her text, the lustful Muslim other basically co-opt, appropriate your women, right? And so in this particular image, the pir is layering at these is depicted layering at these Hindu women, right? This is just an example of how the processes of othering work, right? The Muslim other is created, is produced. There's a creative process to it, and it's meant to serve different political and economic agendas, right? And understanding the processes of othering exposes the agendas they serve. So, so we must constantly keep looking at what this images such as these, what purpose they're serving, like the one that Professor Zargar was showing as well. But we can look to history and the present, actually, like what we all are doing here, for examples of composite milieus where historical subjects fostered an interest in multiple religious and philosophical traditions, even as they accommodated difference. So even as we looked to history and to historical context to think about how the processes of othering have worked, we can also look to history for some kind of hope. right? We can look to history for examples of other ways of being. And so here, I want to, and Angela will be familiar with this particular image, but this is something that we talked about in our class a couple of weeks ago. But here the image that you're seeing that you're seeing on the screens right now is from Abul Fazl's Akbarnama. It's basically a folio from a text that was dedicated to tracing the life and reign of the 16th century Mughal Emperor Akbar. And it depicts, the image is a depiction of sul-e-kul, or universal toleration, but toleration without the negative connotations to it. But so what it's depicting is sul-e-kul, or universal toleration in practice at Akbar's court. Sul-e-kul was defined by an interest in knowledge of people, no matter how different they were from you. Historically, this interest across communities has resulted in new traditions, knowledge systems, and arts, right? Whenever people come together across differences, some really good things can come out of it. The Mughal period witnessed the emergence of new musical traditions, which too we talked about in our class. Sorry, Angela, this is sounding like one of our class sessions. But, new ragas are being developed, new musical genres like the Drupad, which basically combine different kinds of musical styles, came about. And this only happened because certain practices of Hindu devotionalisms aligned or coincided with Sufi devotionalism and their shared love for music, right? So what can we take away from this? And many other examples from history. It's amazing. I had to choose, like, what do we talk about? Because there's just so much to draw hope from. What can we take away from this is that, learning about each other can lead to new and more interesting conversations. Something wonderful can come out of these investments beyond what we already know. But at the very least, it can teach us empathy, which we, as in all of us, irrespective of our religious and non-religious leanings, then use to counter practices of othering. It can teach us to empathize and show us the immense promise of sharing and collaboration. And in contemporary India and elsewhere, because right now that's where I'm focused on in many ways, it's troubling. But in contemporary India and elsewhere, these values are more urgent than ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was incredibly, incredibly informative. We really, really genuinely appreciate both of your insights. Again, thank you for preparing all of that information. It really does mean a lot. But yeah, so now for all of you, we will be hosting a Q&A. So if you have any questions for the professors themselves, we will be allowing you to ask them. So if you have any questions about the content that they asked, if you have any questions about a summary per se, or if you have any questions about Islamophobia as a whole, this is your time. And I'll just share my screen as well. And so the way that the Q&A will be handled will be through the chat box, but it'd be preferred to raise your hand and verbally speak, just for organizational purposes, in case questions get lost in the chat. But yeah, so we will get started with our Q&A. If anyone wants to start raising their hands. And yes, this will be direct questions you can ask. No need for intimidation. Again, this is a safe space. I'd like to ensure that. And if you have anything that you want to be more knowledge about, this is your opportunity. Okay, I'll start with the first question. So this is a question directed to both of you. What would you say is one thing that you wish people? What is one way that you believe that people should, everyone should know about Islam as a whole? So It's in Asia and in America and both in general, the topic on Islamophobia. Yeah. But my question for both of the professors today is, what one thing about Islam that you would like to share that you believe isn't known by many people? What would it be as a whole?
Oh, I wouldn't. So if I could just, that's a really good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. And I don't think anything I'm going to say is going to be novel or new. But with that disclaimer, I'll just say that that there is no one homogeneous Islam. Islam is in its lived practices. There are different kinds of Islamic traditions, and that before we ever venture to talk about to represent Islam, we must be mindful of that. And it's only by paying attention to its histories, its rich histories, right? Histories which are also marked by accommodation as well as contestation. Can we contest these kinds of lazy practices of stereotyping? Right?
That's really good. I'll continue that line of thought. I think if there's one thing I wish people would know about Islam or Islamic civilizations, it's that it's the humanistic traditions within them. What I mean is, people when they think about Islam, they don't think about the arts, they don't think about music, they don't think about philosophy, they don't think about poetry. And so it becomes easy to think about Islam as simply, and Muslims as simply, this group of people who, have some very, stringent religious views, and that is it, right? When actually we're talking about not just a group of people who's incredibly diverse, but who's given something to global cultures, something that's worth knowing. And that's why, I was focusing on depictions, because I think that, on the one hand, there's certain things out there that are very dangerous. I mean, who could imagine that, for example, a show like Homeland would be on the air or whatever, streaming still in like today? Like, that seems like something from the 80s, that seems like Chuck Norris style, racism, but it's still around. But the flip side to, those kinds of the negative depictions is that we need, that there has to be people who appreciate the beauty of each cultural tradition of the world, of each major civilization of the world, and the Islamic civilizations are among them. So that would be my wish. Yeah.
If I could just piggyback on what Professor Zargar just said, often in these stereotypical depictions of Islam, it's always posed as a religion that is antithetical to science, to rationalist thought. But how many people really stop to think that Ibn Sina is actually the Avicenna that whose studies were so foundational to Western science and knowledge, right? That part of Islamic history is an Islamic practice is constantly elided through these depictions, right? Is Islam as this or Islamic communities as being antithetical to modernity, being antithetical to knowledge, and knowledge of all kinds, right? It's science. There's, as Professor Zargar was saying, there you think about art history, you think about poetry, different kinds of literary traditions, and when you think about this, think about the role of the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula in actually serving as this conduit for the movement of ideas and knowledge from Southeast Asia and South Asia into the European world, where these, you had these Arabic scholars who were busy translating texts and circulating them, because the Islamic world at one point became like this, as this glue that bound, the southern and the northern hemispheres. Those stereotypical representations are completely shattered, right? So yeah, I think thank you so much for actually mentioning that, Professor Zargar.
Well, thank you. Thank you for mentioning Ibn Sina. I'm a big fan of Ibn Sina. Yeah.
Okay, so Ricky, we'll be covering the questions that you asked later in the presentation. But one question that we have for both professors from Abdullah Sagib is, how can we combat Islamophobia, and what is a solution, or perhaps a solution?
Well, I could just say one quick thing, which is that I used to, the answer that I used to go to was, education, things like that. But being involved in interfaith, some of the interfaith studies materials that are out there, what I've come to learn is that education is good, but it doesn't actually break down the barriers. When it comes to racial prejudice, when it comes to religious prejudice, those who've studied it tell us that the thing that breaks down those barriers is meeting people and knowing them, and personal connections with people. So very often the people who hold the most prejudiced views against any other group of people are those who have the least amount of meaningful relationships with them. Now, how do you increase meaningful relationships between people? I mean, that's there's no easy answer to that, but I think that you can bring that into education, So when I taught at a smaller school, one of the things we would do is in the religions, the world religions class, we would visit all the different places of worship that we would study and interact with those people. You can do that at a smaller school. Interact with them, eat with them, talk with them, and the effects were transformative. Now, can we do that at a big school like UCF? Maybe not, but can we come close to it? Can we try? I think so. So, and I'd like to hear what Dr. Narayan has to say about that too.
No, I think I completely agree with you. I think this has to happen through education to some extent, but the other is work within in the communities, right? And one of the ways in which this can happen is again, as through these kinds of projects that compel us, actually excite us to look beyond our own specific histories, our own specific experiences, but also, and as we do that, to think about both similarities and differences, and then to say, are differences really so, are they bad, or are they good, in the sense that do they make for a more interesting world? But yes, practical, these have, I think the community is really important in this context, right? And finding ways to do that is important, as well as I think I like how you said, you'd visit some of these sites, as well as sometimes, shunning our own, I think at the university, sometimes because we tend to create these distinctions between secular spaces and religious spaces, right? And so there are certain spaces where you wouldn't, you don't necessarily engage with, right? But really, those are artificial, divisions. Not everyone sees their lives as being divided along, this is a secular space and this is a religious space. And so going to those spaces and involving more people in a wider conversation is an important one. But really, it is, moving out of our own particularities and and really genuinely being interested.
Hope that answered your question. I see Khaled had his hand up for a while, so if you want to ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Zargar, Dr. Narayan. Thank you so much for giving your talks. Very insightful. Now, we have this thing, and I'm pretty sure Zainab can kind of testify to this as well. As people who've been in Asian American leadership who are Muslims in predominantly East and Southeast Asian spaces, sometimes we come upon almost like a maybe like a frustration fatigue that both sides of the aisle, whether our Muslim communities or the mainstream Asian American community at large, tend to view the Muslim sphere and the Asian American sphere as almost mutually exclusive or apart, when in reality there is a lot of overlap. Not even just in the historical sense, but just in the struggle that we face in the United States, perpetual foreigner syndrome, a lot of similar social stigmas, model minority in some cases, things of this nature. In your view, what is something that the Muslim community can do to better, find a home in Asian American sphere activism, and what can the collective mainstream Asian American sphere do to be more receptive to Muslim communities?
That's a really good question.
It is a good question because it involves some thinking.
Yeah. I think, if I may, I think sometimes what happens is that we must also be, obviously, part of this is about, as based on a previous conversation, obviously community is important. I realized in the last, when my last kind of response, I didn't mention that the state is important, right? This is about resources, this is about effecting change in policies. But the other thing that I would like to say in response to your question is that I think we also need to dispense with the 1950s area studies approach. Many of us often don't realize that the ways in which we have divided the world, right, into South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, this terminology is quite recent. It came out of Cold War politics, and in some ways this that kind of categorization of the world and communities belong, that are tied to these different area studies, to these different categories, get divided along them. And so when you with and so what is missed therefore is this kind of I would say this approach, which is, you look sideways, right? You look outside of the categories that are so defining of our identities, right? Think about all the forms that we often have to fill, right? What kind of, in terms of your ethnicity, many forms that I've had to fill is South Asian, right? And so you need, and I think it took me a while to realize, what does this do? It makes you think about your own experience, your own identity through those little boxes, and so maybe using new geographies is important. But when I say geographies, it's not just in terms of the physics, the physical part of it, right? But geographies that include human movement, right? If we firstly dispense with these divisions of large parts of the world along these, Cold War period categories, and then we into that particular conversation, we think about diaspora, we think about immigration, histories of immigration. I think will be able to, I think it helps us to think about shared experiences, right? That do not block us, so that we don't think about ourselves only as South Asian Americans or Southeast Asian Americans or Chinese Americans, but those that are that have histories of immigration from certain parts of the world, and also subject to policies that are designed to manage these communities. And that may actually be in some ways similar and dissimilar. And I think that's why, and I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time and I'll stop right here, but I think the point that you were raising about this idea of the model community, that, the policies that are generated around these ideas also then need to be queried, and as to how they actually serve to turn these communities often against each other, right? As they're vying for this, this carrot and stick policy.
That's really great. I'm not going to add anything. That was great. And because I just wanted to support what you're saying. I came from an institution that was, very much in that mold, the old, as you say, World War II mold of area studies and all of that, and the limitations and just it's just an odd way to categorize things. It wasn't useful, and so I completely understand. We don't realize how much the categories that we create end up affecting the way we think. And so we start to describe this as, let's say, Western, and this is Eastern, and and it really does affect the way we think about them. So it's a beautiful answer. I'm not going to add anything to it. It's really great.
Thank you so much.
All right, that was a great question. Adrian, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so I guess this is a question on like the same, or on the different, okay, I'm trying to say something, but basically it's a different side to the coin of Khaled's question, which is asking how can Muslim American communities better get involved within the Asian American community? But in the same way, how is it that Asian Americans, those of us that come from the East Asian backgrounds or else have these privileges, can better support and to defend our Muslim American communities? Because it shouldn't just be on one community to educate all of society on their issues, but it's as much of our responsibility to share, like to amplify these stories, but also to really educate ourselves and also take action on their behalf too. So that is a question to both professors as well, is what can Asian American communities do in solidarity with our Muslim American communities?
Well, I have one small suggestion, and it seems small, but actually you'd be amazed at how effective it is. I lived in this kind of small urban area, the Quad Cities, for 10 years, and there were 2 mosques, and despite how small it was, after, I think it was after the San Bernardino shootings, someone actually shot a bullet through one of the windows of the mosques, and it was reported as a projectile. Like the police didn't want to say it was a bullet, but it was obviously a bullet. And because it was a smaller urban area, the way that people could come together and support each other, it was a lot more, how shall we say, it was smaller, so it was easier to organize than, let's say, a big place like Orlando. And one of the things that people did was actually, they did this at the college where I taught, is they just got a big poster board with messages of support for the mosque, and everyone wrote on it, like, we just want you to know that we're with you and we understand what you're going through. And they wrote it on this poster board, and then they took the poster board to the mosque and they gave it to them and they hung it up there. And that seems so small. It is, but what happens is, after events like this, when there's an attack on a group of people, mentally, there's this, what they call it, like the saliency bias, where you start to think, oh my gosh, everybody sees me this way. I have no friends, I have no allies except here in my community. And that one act saying, hey, we support you, we're with you, that kind of reaching out, it sort of helps. It really, they put it right by the entrance, right when you walked in the mosque, you'd see this poster board with all these different messages of support. So I think that's the main thing, is, have your ear to the ground for these big events. Every time something like that happens, I can show you the statistics. Anytime there's something that's reported in the news, like there was the San Bernardino shooting, and there was, I'm trying to think of another big one. Well, in France, for example, the Hebdo attacks. Whenever those things happen, there's a peak in Islamophobic hate crimes. So they're related to each other. So you can almost predict when Islamophobic hate crimes are going to peak. They happen right after events like that. And that's when the support's really needed. So I think if other communities are like, hey, now would be a good time. Let's write a card, let's just write a card and send it to the mosque and just say, hey, our group or our church or our whatever, we're with you. It can be a big help.
I think that's wonderful. And that particular anecdote, thank you so much for sharing this, and because I'm just thinking about it as you explain this, right, to visually, to be able to mark that solidarity in space, in place, right, and produce meaning as these people are writing, as everyone's coming together and writing, near the entrance. It is a reminder, right, and a visual representation of that solidarity, and so it. I think that's just absolutely wonderful, and and I didn't know about this. I think what you just mentioned about keeping an ear to the ground and being able to have a sense of when these patterns, to have a sense of these patterns and when these things are going to escalate, and then be prepared is a really something that I think I need to think about much more. The other thing, given, and this is from my own personal experience, when I think, when I consider my own journey, and given what's happening in India, contemporary India, the Indian nation state right now, is also that of self-reflection. I think that's become really important, right? And which is why I thought what you all were doing is so important. In some ways, it's such a it's such a in some it's what's the word I'm it's such a wonderful way to push back against what's happening in South Asia right now as well, right? In the sense that you have these different student groups who are collaborating and coming together, completely challenging the politics of the nation states in these, in this region, at a time when, let's not forget, like in India, for instance, now, some of the most wonderful Pakistani singers who contributed to who lent their voices to the most beautiful songs cannot do so anymore, right? Actors and singers who participated in the Indian film industry cannot do so anymore, because the nation state there intervenes and is stopping those, actively intervening in those, and foiling those conversations. But what we see, what you all are doing over here is a direct kind of challenge to that kind of thinking. And what it makes me think about is, it gives me hope that there's also a moment for self-reflection, that even as these communities, even as all of us from these different communities look sideways and think about our common experiences and the ways in which we experience racism and discrimination, we also look inward and see how we might also be, be fostering some of those ideas, right? Islamophobia is a problem for many South Asians. Many South Asians participate in Islamophobia. I was just telling my students in my Modern India class recently, I don't know if you've been following the Indian media, but very recently, a 14-year-old Muslim boy, a child, was beaten badly for entering the temple compound in the, in the outskirts of the Delhi, basically the national capital region, just for drinking water. Right, and so to be able to identify what's going on for me, I'm thinking about this in South Asia, and then seeing how some of these communities, right, are also transnational. Islamophobia is also a transnational thing. Within the Indian American community, there is basically there is a strand of people who do participate in this, and who do support the idea of India as a Hindu nation, right? And so it's for us as people who are American, who live in America, are Americans, I think the questions that you're asking about collaborations, solidarities, actually punctures those kinds, those transnational, practices of Islamophobia.
Thank you so much for sharing. Again, both of your insights are incredibly valuable. So we have one last question from Zora Kazi, and they asked, so it was similar to Abdullah's question, and it's a really good question to end on a final note. But so how can we combat Islamophobic rhetoric and propaganda released from politicians and continued by Western society? So as a whole, how can we help combat all of that? If any of you would like to tackle that question first, in light of all of the recent rhetoric and propaganda being released currently and in the past, how do you believe is the best counteracting point of so?
Well, I'll just say one small thing. It's to know where you stand, like philosophically. When you have a certain perspective on social justice and on diversity, when you're confident about it, and then you're brave enough to speak up, when you see a wrong happen to anyone, so that it'll make you consistent, because you can tell the difference between someone who's just really defending their own identity or defending themselves, as opposed to when that light switch comes on and it becomes part of their philosophy, and they start caring about any case of discrimination, any case of wrongdoing. Something's changed in the way that person sees the world. And so, maybe that's happened for you. And if it has, good. Now it's good to help others too, to get to that stage, because when someone is at that stage, then all of us, we become advocates for each other. And it doesn't matter if it's, Islamophobia or, racism or prejudice against any group. What happens is we just naturally know what, to do. We naturally care. It comes from within. So that's my small comment.
I would say that, it's just to piggyback on what Dr. Zargar was saying, about claiming space, that, while there is the state, as you mentioned, I think if I'm not misunderstanding your question, that there is the discourse, right? As one of the ways to challenge discourses of Islamophobia is to put our voices out there, right? To ensure that there is no, that these ideas or these messages are not just coming from one place. They're not, the messages are not being disseminated only from one place, and that could be, communities or states that are more in that are in power, right? But really to make to diffuse these centers of power by puncturing them, right? Basically, essentially to puncture them through our own voices, right? Creating platforms through which one can contest, right? One can historicize, one can think about, ideate about different kinds of new possibilities, right? And so in many ways, I see what you all have done over here is one of those, is create one of those sites, so that not one group or one, site of power has the monopoly in sending out or representing a community, right? Representing Muslims in, Muslim Americans, or representing, Asian Americans, or representing, all communities that are that are subject to structural racism, right? Yeah, that's, I would think that is a way, and it's easier said than done. But finding these spaces is, I think you all are great at it. So building them.
Thank you so much for sharing. So I believe we'll be wrapping up the question and answer with both of those with all of that input. But again, thank you both so much for coming, taking your time. If there's anything you'd like to add, any closing comments, that would be fantastic. Again, your insight was incredibly invaluable. I mean, I am Muslim, but my eyes are open. I learned so much today. And again, thank you both, Dr. Zargar and Dr. Narayan, for your inputs, for your insight, for answering all of these questions and being vulnerable and really just providing your knowledge to all of us and connecting with students as a whole. Thank you again. So if you have any closing comments or anything that you would like to add before we continue, please feel free to do so.
Well, I'll just say thank you. Just knowing that, just seeing the way all of you interacted with each other, listening to Dr. Narayan speak, and just learning. I mean, this gives me hope. Knowing that all of you are on campus, I think that gives me strength. You know what I'm saying? Like the way, knowing that there are other people so nearby who think this way, I think that's where it gives me strength as a person too. So this is great. Keep it up. You know, keep doing this. And stay together and keep working together, because this is a great group and you're doing, you know, it's amazing. You're doing amazing things here.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, actually what we're seeing at work is deep democracy, right? That's what you're doing outside of outside of the more, when we think about democracy, when we think about power, or we think about policies, there are certain conventional sites that we look to, but then there is but what you're doing is also one of those those sites where you're building a deep democracy, recognizing solidarities within these, within your within the whole student body, but also I think tying in, right, to people like us, and which is, and allowing us to learn from you. I think I've learned more than anything else. I've learned so much from Dr. Zargar's presentation and the questions that you've all asked. And I was astounded by how many, questions I just felt so absolutely inadequate in answering. And I think for me, that's the job done. The point of a question is to make you think, and you've made me think. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for coming and sharing your insight today.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. Feel free to stay, but we'll be launching in this more student-led discussions now. But your input is obviously very valuable as well, if you're willing to do so. Right now, we'll just be starting the more broad knowledge, obviously not on the level of professors themselves, and it'll be discussion questions too that all of us who may want to participate can participate in as well. So we'll start with PD size part.
All right, so something that's important, is, of course, Islamophobia in the international world, just around the world. So something that, we'd like to start off with is the Uyghur concentration camps. The Uyghur people are the Muslim minority of Xinjiang, China. At least 1 million Muslims have been sent to these detention camps to be, they say, re-educated, but it's more to be interned. And the efforts is just basically to, suppress the voices of the Islamic faith. And it's been going on for the past 3 years, and over 85 identified camps. And a lot of people are usually beaten, threatened, and, this is just pure, just erasing, they're trying to erase Islam. And the next is the Rohingya people of Myanmar. The Rohingya are the minority Islamic people of Myanmar. And for many years, the government has been launching military in the Muslim areas. The Myanmar government doesn't really talk about it. And other countries don't really have much to fight it further. And since 2017, more than 700,000 Rohingya people have actually fled to Bangladesh, since that's their only way to refuge. And another one is Kashmir. That's the Jammu Kashmir state of India, which has a very high concentration of Muslim population, which is mainly because it kind of like coincides with Pakistan. And something that happened in late 2019 was the Prime Minister of India, Modi, he enforced a total lockdown in the entire state with a military regime on the people, arresting and killing anyone on the way, which was basically a genocide. And something less Asia, Europe and Canada, in the late 2017, Quebec, they passed Bill 62, banning people who wear face veils from receiving or giving public services. So anything that's from, hijabs, and that's definitely, trying to suppress Islam. And in Britain, a legislation that allows people to be stopped at ports without reasonable suspicion, allowing them to target Islamic people. So let's discuss this. So you guys can raise your hands, whoever would like to talk first, but what are your thoughts on what is going on in Asia and Europe, and what are some ways you could bring awareness to these issues?
Colin, if you would like to go first.
Hi, everyone. I hate to interject first, but I think this is a topic that we need to speak about in very nuanced terms. So please, everyone, have some patience with me as we delve into a level of nuance. Some of you here attended some of my workshops over the summer. I hosted with the East Coast Asian American Student Union. I hosted a whole workshop on the history of the Uyghur people. And so this is something, it's a little bit of a contentious topic in Asian American spheres, because I don't want you to misconstrue the difference, right, between advocating for Uyghur people and xenophobia. And I'll tell you, unfortunately, in the United States and the Western world, we have a problem in which they tend to be conservative war hawks. They'll almost hijack the Uyghur human rights crisis, and they'll use it as a guise for xenophobia and an aggressive foreign policy. Now, I'm not here to talk about foreign policy. I'm here to talk about Uyghur people. Even within, and in my aunt, she was an artist, so I spent part of my childhood going to like these trade shows, and there would be a lot of people there from mainland China, artists as well. And so when they would find out that we were Muslim, they would have like an irk almost, because not all, but there is a good portion of these artists, they're accustomed to Uyghur and Muslim in general being painted as terrorists, as being these separatists. And there's been intentional propaganda campaigns toward that, and we can talk about the imperialism that the modern Chinese state has had over Tibet and East Turkestan and Inner Mongolia. But that's not what we're doing today. And then on the flip side, we also talk about the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, right? Now, recently, there was the military coup in Myanmar. And so there was a lot of mainstream sentiment in the Asian American sphere that in support for Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, for Muslims, and I understand it's a very contentious subject, and me and my Burmese friends have gone back and forth on this lots of times. Aung San Suu Kyi's government, while I understand it was limited, it did oversee periods in Myanmar's history where there was genocide with Uyghur people. So for us as Muslims, it was very hard to stand with Aung San Suu Kyi, but of course we stand with the people. It's very complicated because, being involved in the Asian sphere, I'm almost torn, right? Of course I support the movement, but I don't support the face of the movement, right? So we get into these and then last one we talk is Kashmir, and with the rise of Hindutva and increased BJP sentiment in India, right? All these things, they point to a problem, or rather a thing that we have. Muslims, right? Islam is the largest religion in Asia. That's just that's the demographic, right? So people coming from Asia, or families from Asia, or cultures from Asia are accustomed to Muslims in their homelands, right? They come to the United States and they're pushed a second Islamophobic rhetoric. It's almost 2 in 1, right? So to this I say, Dr. Zargar made a good point about introspection on your philosophy, right? And I was saying this in my question earlier, Muslim civilization and Asian civilization hand in hand, so much overlap, right? I mean, it is in Asia, right? But I want you to do this. When you do your introspection, right, I want you to consider if some of your conceptions on Muslims is not even just coming from American media, but cultural itself. And I encourage you, and Adrian said this quite well, diversify your friend groups. And I do not want you to hesitate. And this is for me, and I think Zainab and Zuhra, they share the sentiment as well. We fear that after we're done in our leadership position in Asian American sphere, we leave, next person comes along, they're not Muslim or anything of that nature, people forget about the subject matter. We're scared of this because realistically, like we're one person, like our influence in the organization is maybe 4, 5, 6 years, and then that's it, right? So please, I encourage you, within your organizations, within your spheres of Asian American activism, make it a structural component to have Muslim, South Asian, Arab, Sikh, Hindu, etc. representation embedded in there. And so things, and I gave a full presentation on this 3 years ago to Ikasu, consider in your organizations having a SWANA or a Muslim outreach or a MASA chair, right? Specifically dedicated towards ensuring that these voices also have a place at the table. And I guess I'll just close this small thing, and I don't mean to overspeak. I'm going to recommend 3 books. I'll prop the name in the chat. The first one is We Too Sing America. It's South Asian, Arab, Muslim, and Sikh immigrants shape our multicultural future. It's by Deepa Iyer, amazing author. We have Edward Said's Orientalism, and Dr. Zargar's presentation spoke about Orientalism. And so Edward Said is very famous. If you're political science, I'm sure you know this. I'm not political science, but I still know it. And then lastly, I recommend the Routledge Journal of Asian American Studies. There's a chapter in here on Arab Americans and the incorporation of Arab American activism into Asian American activism. All these things I recommend to any organization who's seeking to be more inclusive. And to Muslims in attendance, I need to give a big thank you to Abdullah, because I'll be honest with you, early in my career at UCF, I did not have a lot of support from the Muslim community for being involved in Asian American leadership. They're like, stick to the Muslim leadership. It was like, oh, Muslims, Arab, Desis, are we even Asian? Like things of this nature, right? But Abdullah and I think the newer culture that we see with Zainab and Zuhra and all these people, they've been more receptive to that, and this is what we need more of. So I encourage the Muslim community also as well. You belong in the Asian American narrative, and you'll be surprised how receptive the community can be, but you need to do your part as well, right? So thank you everyone, and I'm sorry for overspeaking.
Don't apologize for overspeaking. Your insights are always incredibly valuable. We resonate with a lot of what you said. Due to time, we'll be moving forward, but just to touch on a lot of what Khalid said, I think a call to action definitely is to incorporate more diverse voices in your organizations. I know a lot of anxiety from a Muslim perspective, from a South Asian perspective, is that we don't see any representation. So we don't want to be the person to actually be the first person to do something because we're afraid of being isolated, not accepted, or not really being listened to. Because especially like joining like either, I didn't face this with APAC thankfully, but or like with any Asian organization over here specifically, but with other like organizations that I have been part of, it's like gaslit, not taken seriously, or just microaggressions galore. And because of unsafe environments like that, and especially being Muslim, which where Islamophobia is incredibly normalized, it's a lot of fear because a lot of our values don't align with like what Western values align with. And at times it's like the fear of not being accepted, being judged, or being isolated just because our values don't align with certain values and different morals. But again, thank you so much for contributing. So we'll just be moving forward with really talking about domestically, like domestic Islamophobia. So what do we see over here currently? What do we see in America right now? As you can see, it's very brief, but I believe the professors touched upon everything so wonderfully. I don't want to take away their space. So there's 3 main problems that I saw in the United States: the media, hate crimes, and very obviously the travel ban. So for the media, media portrayals are inherently negative and they portray Islam in a negative manner. And I've been seeing this since I was born and raised in America. A lot of times I feel like what the media does is they may not say like Muslims are bad, but they may have jokes about Muslims, like men having big beards and them being conservative, or having a South Asian character and having them be an inherent misogynist and making South Asian jokes, or having Indian actors solely portray terrorists or solely portray negative beings. And it's stuff like that that makes you really struggle with your identity. Personal experience wise, I remember my brother, one of my brothers, he really struggled with his religion for a bit just because of how much negativity, whatever forum he would see online, anything about Islam, we're always on guard because there's always going to be an Islamophobic thread and people are going to agree with it and no one's going to speak up for us unless they're Muslim. And that's something that we see. And another common trope that we do see is Hijabi trope. I feel like a lot of hijabis would resonate with this. Is in any TV show, especially Netflix series, for some reason, if there is a hijabi character, she will eventually take her hijab off for a man, and usually a white man. And that is very, very wrong for obvious reasons. But for specifically dismantling like that perspective, it's wrong because it shows. So for hijab, for a lot of people, actually is very incredibly liberating. It makes people feel secure in their identity, and it actually helps them express themselves a lot more, contrary to what you may see from Western television, where it's like, oh, she's being forced into this, she's being forced, she's being like forcefully subjugated to wearing hijab. I mean, I don't wear hijab, and that is a choice. I don't face any criticism for it from my parents, so myth completely dismantled. But again, it's stuff like this that's normalized. I remember watching Community, that show, which is so popular, and it was in the first season, and I believe the character's name was Abed, and his cousin was coming over or something, and the entire episode was about how the children or like the stuff were being forced to wear a burqa, and one of the characters like ended up like doing a switcheroo so they don't have to wear the burqa, and I was just like, this is incredibly Islamophobic. This episode is incredibly Islamophobic, but I didn't see any criticism about it because the only people that were criticizing it were Muslims themselves, because they could easily see and unpack all of that. And as a result, we really need to start criticizing the media more often. And I believe, again, with what's like, what can we do? Call to action, like non-Muslims should be standing like with us when it comes to criticizing these, because at the end of the day, from what I see, it's Muslims being like, this is wrong, but the show being accepted by the wider population regardless. And unfortunately, there are also hate crimes that are happening. I believe Dr. Zargar touched on this a lot better than I can. However, these are reported numbers. I would like to note that in 2015, there were 257 hate crimes against Muslims, and continuously you can see an increase in like the percentage of it. And many victims are reluctant to contact police due to distrust and lack of confidence, and really just to unpack hate crimes. Unfortunately, with what you can see recently, the media sometimes is very, very hesitant in reporting things as hate crimes. And as a result, the number that you see is not the true number as a whole. And a lot of times, from what I've seen from the Muslim community itself, is we have a lot of fear from both the police and both the FBI, because as a joke in the Muslim community, it's like, oh, if I say one word, I'm going to get like on a watch list. And that, while it is in humor, it's like unpacking it is what is on a watch list for searching up like a certain word. I mean, I can't say, I don't want to say it right now, like you know what I mean. It's very, 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 very deep rooted in the fear of authority. Sometimes it's really, really a lot to unpack, and that's why when it comes to aspects like these, the number that you see is not the number that is true, and a lot of the times we're really just spoken over, or we just don't want to speak because I guess it ties into the model minority myth and being viewed as a perpetual foreigner. Because even if you do speak up, the fear is that, considering how deep-rooted Islamophobia is what if the person that we're reporting what happened to us ends up saying that you deserved it, or it's because of your religion or whatever. I mean, that's a personal fear of mine. If I ever it's like deep-rooted insecurities that we may have just because of how constantly the amount of Islamophobia that we see, that I see on a daily basis. And then finally, I see those chat box. I can't, if anyone would like to speak up or whatever of what's happening in the chat box, but I can't look at it because I'm speaking. But finally, I just like to unpack the travel ban. So this is, I mean, this is the most blatant amount of Islamophobia that I have seen, and it is incredibly disheartening. Under Donald Trump's executive order, visas from the following countries were terminated. This isn't even all of the countries. This is just this is like a few out of many: Iran, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Sudan, and more. And there was an update to the travel ban actually that targeted Black majority countries that were also Muslim. And also, to add on to the travel ban, there's like certain communities and countries that are put on watch lists. People from certain countries that are put on watch lists actually, where their data is tracked, and a majority of those countries are also Muslim, because of a fear of them being terrorists as a whole. I mean, I'm even uncomfortable saying the word terrorist just because how much stigma is attached to it, being Muslim. And visas from the following countries were terminated. And what you see from this is a lot of these countries had Western occupation. A lot of these countries had US occupation into their countries. And because of that, there are a lot of refugees that need to come to America, or that don't need to come to America, but that need to come and transfer into a safer environment. And they are not able to do so because of this travel ban. They have no place to go, or individuals who may be studying abroad, studying in the US, or individuals who may be studying, or individuals who may have come for a work visa. They're getting their work visas revoked. They're left without a home. And it's incredibly, incredibly angering because there's not much that we can, we can do petitions, we can do so much, but the politicians just don't seem to be listening to us. It's all empty words and empty promises. One thing I'd like to also touch on is the Israel and Palestine conflict. As you may know, the Palestine is Muslim majority, and with Israel as a whole, it's a very, very personal issue to every Muslim, because one thing that we see is a lot of politicians may promise, especially may promise like reform, treating Muslims better, but then they fund Israel, or they fund war initiatives in Muslim countries, and we immediately are like, okay, your words are empty. You're just targeting our community as a whole. And seeing that Islamophobia is it's very very, 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 very disheartening and very painful, especially because it's like we don't really see anything happening as a whole. But that was a lot. So we can, just to further unpack what I said, there's like 46 messages. But so we do have a few questions. So kind of what I touched on is like, in what way do you believe the media contributes to a negative perception of Islam? If you are Muslim, how has Islamophobia impacted you? And how can we best tackle Islamophobia as a student body? From the professors, we got really like a general perspective, but as students, what can we do? So I'll just mute my mic and let y'all speak and untackle. If anyone would like to answer one of these questions, that would be great.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I guess I'll take a stab at it first. So really in my time here at UCF, and especially like with the greater student body, I found that really just opening up a conversation with basically any student allows to really remove some misconceptions, because in a lot of cases, especially if a student came from a community that is Islamophobic or has a background in Islamophobia, generally just meeting a Muslim gives them the chance to remove that stigma. And in a lot of cases that I found, they never actually had the chance to meet a Muslim ever in their life. So you're the first person who actually made that move and actually talked to them about Islam, instead of getting it straight from the media or from anywhere that their sources were from. So it's really important to keep an open mind and to give other people excuses, because, you know, perhaps they're not Islamophobic because they hate Islam, but they're Islamophobic because that's what was drilled into them and that's all they know. So it gives you the chance as a learning moment and teaching moment to really open their minds.
Yeah, to that, I'd like to also say, you know, coming from North Korean American, meeting Khalid from ASA was amazing. He became my big, and I still talk to him like all the time. So Khalid, thank you so much for always taking my calls. But as much as it was because of his friendship that I learned, you know, and I was able to find out more resources about also where to educate myself, I really do think it's on part of our Asian American community here, or else anyone else who may not identify as Muslim American, to find these stories too and to educate ourselves. Like, we shouldn't always be, you know, we shouldn't just wait for these things to happen or else tragedies to occur, or then it's just like, oh, now I can do it. And, you know, it's really also on us to recognize, like, our worldviews are so limited if we don't have a diverse perspective, but we have so many resources today. We live in the age of technology. There's a lot of Twitter people you can follow, Instagram people that you can follow, YouTube videos that you can find, like literally any readings as well. So please educate yourself too. Like, don't always ask for someone to explain you a concept unless you really need to, but let's not like extort people's trauma, you know, like let's be mindful of that too.
Thank you so much for sharing. I agree. Just sometimes educating yourself without, like, because at times, sometimes like, one thing that happens is all the questions get put on us, and it's a lot helpful if you can do the research on your own sometimes, just because at times questions that can seem well-intentioned, we've answered it so much in the past, it becomes kind of tiring. So it would be great. However, again, asking questions with good intentions is always like a fantastic as well. Would anyone else like to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add, kind of going off what Adrian had said. While it is important, like education is a very big, important step that our community needs to make, it's also, we need to like bridge our communities together, because right now, like from what I'm seeing, it feels very distant. Like they are very two different spheres. And I think finding ways to connect our communities and just engage with each other, and like having events like this is a great way to start. You know, it's a great place to start, and we need to continue that momentum and continue like hosting events like these together and opening the space to everyone, honestly. Yeah.
One thing that I would like to add, Assalamu alaikum, my peace be upon you all. My name is Abdullah. A lot of you know me. For those of you who don't, I work with the MSA here on campus. So one thing is obviously having that conversation. This is something that needs to be said to both Muslims and non-Muslims when it comes to Islamophobia. Muslims have to be not afraid to speak openly about their religion. They should be informed of their religion, about the tenets of the religion. And I don't like to use the word defend, because we don't have to defend our religion at the end of the day, or absolve ourselves of the actions that people do that are politically motivated, not religiously motivated. But a person should be able to stand up for what they believe in. So that's A. B, it should be the other way around, where people who aren't Muslim should be ready and open to discuss these things with Muslims. So that's, the conversation has to happen. But even more than that, so that's A. Step 2, so we haven't even really done step 1 though, but another thing that should be said, step 2, is then facilitating life for Muslims. One must understand that the religion of Islam, it has many things that a Muslim has to do. For example, a Muslim can only eat halal meat, and a Muslim has to pray 5 times a day. And a Muslim has to, before every time they pray, go and make wudu or ablution, where they have to go find a source of water and to wash their hands and their feet, and they have to wash their arms and their face as well. Now, all these things, in many ways, Muslims are not I don't want to say the word embarrassed, but many times they are embarrassed. These things should be facilitated. And if you do see a Muslim with their foot in the sink, many times I and many other Muslims have been stared at, or like people have been like, what the heck's going on over here? Support them, or go and ask what they're doing. Be open to these kind of things. Facilitate for them so they don't feel like they're doing something weird, because it is a religion that everyone must understand that almost a quarter of humanity follows. So much of your human brothers and sisters are followers of this religion. It's a part of our global community. It's a part of humanity. So therefore, it's upon us all to not only learn, to not only understand, but also facilitate and accept and to integrate these people, Muslims, into our lives, into our communities, and also to facilitate for them to practice the religion openly. Like when you're Muslims, friends, they might have to go and pray 5 times a day. Kind of just be open to that. Realize that your Muslim friends, they're not going to drink, they're not going to eat pork, they're not going to do a lot of things that other people do. Facilitate those things, be open to them, and be ready to see those things coming, because otherwise you create a very awkward we create a very awkward environment. So that's something I just wanted to mention.
Thank you so much for sharing, Abdullah. Your insights are also always very valuable. Would anyone else like to add before we conclude?
I would say if anyone ever has any questions on Islam, about the religion of Islam, because there's so many things that aren't really understood, the concept of hijab for females, the concept of prayer, the concept of what we believe, our theology. If anyone has any questions, never feel hesitant to reach out to a Muslim, or if not, reach out to an Islamic source. Go visit a mosque, go visit a masjid. Almost all of the masjids these days, if you go, our doors are open 20. In pandemic, it's a little bit different. This will go God willing, with time away. Our mosques, for the most part, are open 24/7. Yani not at nighttime, but yani they're open all day. Doors open. You guys can come in, learn, ask the imam, which is the equivalent of a rabbi or a priest for a Muslim community, or just contact the MSA, the Muslim Student Association at UCF. Contact some source and get educated, because there's a lot to learn, and everything. It's a beautiful religion, just like Christianity, just like Judaism. There's much to learn about it. So definitely, we should all get educated. This is a reminder to myself as well to get more educated about Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism, because these are all beautiful religions. I call them all they're all shining rays from the same sun, because we all believe at the same tenets, the same concepts at the end of the day. Sorry, I'm going on, but sorry for speaking. But yeah, just something else I wanted to mention.
Abdullah makes excellent points, and just to add on to his, always thank you, Abdullah. You're like the best resource, I think, at UCF, and probably the best resource they've had in a long time in MSA. But enough Abdullah fangirling. Just some pragmatic advice to the different Asian orgs who might be in attendance tonight. I'll tell you, I've been in Asian org leadership for a long time, and I tell you, I have not been to a single one of the organization's parties, because all of them are very alcohol dependent. You know what I'm saying? Which is fine. I have other ways to have fun, but just something to be conscientious of. And additionally, I think orgs have gotten better at this in recent years. But when you do your bake sales, just be ever cognizant. If you're making a sweet, if it's like you use like chocolate liquor, or rather something that does have alcohol, or mirin or soju or anything, or any of the rice wines in the Japanese cuisine, be cognizant, because Muslims may not want to consume anything that has alcohol in it, or if it has pork, and always just have alternatives. Have the alternatives, like the vegetarian options, or even just halal options if you can, but even vegetarian options, trust me, Muslims won't mind either, or generally won't mind. So just some pragmatic things to be aware of. And also on your social medias, please wish the Muslim, and even not just Muslim, but even like Sikh, Hindu, etc. Just veer away from just, I mean, fortunately, yes, Lunar New Year is very important, so keep doing that, of course. But aside from like the Eurocentric holidays, wish people happy Ramadan, happy Eid, happy Diwali, all these things. Don't just limit it to a very narrow sphere. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I definitely agree. Just being accommodating, and like if someone says they can't do something, like I don't drink, just be accepting of that, and no peer pressure or anything is always incredibly valuable. So again, thank you for sharing. All of you are such valuable speakers, and making towards the end of the event. This did run over time, so thank you for your patience, and thank you for everything. But we will be concluding. I'd like to conclude on one of my favorite quotes. It's actually a quote that I found this quote. It's a Rumi quote while I was just going through a random poetry book that I actually found in Pakistan, and it was right when it was like during like my literary phase when I had the time to actually read. It's a quote by Rumi that I found like as I was going through a poetry book. And to those who know me, they know that I actually hate I don't like poetry, but I was like, I might as well just read a quote from Rumi because he's an Islamic poet, and this one really resonated to me, and I feel like it can be really genuinely applied today. And it's, whatever candle you lit in your mind would look foolish under the sun. So by this, what it means is, whatever you may perceive about someone, whatever you may perceive about a community, whatever you might think about something in existence is nothing compared to reality. Reality is so multidimensional. Reality is so multifaceted. Reality is so insurmountable compared to what we perceive, because we can't see everything. We can only, like, what I can see right now is just this. I can't look into your minds. I can't look into who all of you are. And when applying it to like Muslims, it's always critical to look into it, like, to different perspectives, to really understand who everyone is as a human being, and realize that whatever you may believe could be wrong, and whatever you may perceive could be wrong, and really just constantly challenging your beliefs, because at the end of the day, what Rumi said is, whatever candle you lit in your mind will look foolish under the sun. So thank you all so much for coming today. It genuinely means a lot, and it really, again, it's very, 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 very like eye-opening and impactful. And we are having other APAHM events too. We have another workshop this Monday, and then a workshop after that, where we will also be bringing professors for. And I believe there is a word cloud that we will be sharing that we compiled today. So yeah, if Adrian, you would like to share that.
Yeah, so our word cloud is through this one app. It's called Menti. So if you guys could access that on like your personal devices, it's gonna ask you for like a code. But the question is just asking like, what did you learn today? Just as kind of like a good summary of all the topics that we went through, because it was so much. But yeah, no, this is like a time whether you want to recount like what our professors were sharing, or else just what occurred within like the student conversations. But we'll also be posting this as well as like as a reminder to all that came today, as to like what are the action items that we can do, what was the purpose of us even having this in the first place, and where do we go forward from this. So thank you all to our wonderful directors. So Parth and Zainab, you guys did amazing. The event went on longer than we thought, but it's just because people were so passionate to share their questions. So thank you all. But yeah, no, we're so grateful to have been able to host this. And as always, APAC is here to be a safe space and brave space for anyone who would come to learn and to hear our stories and hear these like narratives that intertwine both the Asian American community and Muslim American community. So thank you to everyone that came here today. And if you want to use the word cloud, the code is right there on the screen. You guys can go ahead and do that. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. They're going to remember your term for inclusivity. Just don't forget that.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Parth. You did great.